Mike, good morning.
Hi, Geoff. Hope you had a good long weekend.
Yeah, excellent one. I even worked in a bit of politics, which we can talk a bit about later.
Uh-oh.
Right in the middle of a long weekend, a public meeting on Indigenous rights, only in BC, hard up against the Stanley Cup playoff game, but it had a big turnout.
Well,
Anyway, that's for later.
You are pretty nerdy.
Not just me, there was quite a few people there. Anyway, the long weekend is behind us. The legislature's on a break week, and it's one of those odd times when most of the BC political news seems to be coming from Alberta. So we'll head to Alberta in a moment and then circle back during Strategy Suite to discuss some of the local issues, such as Premier David Eby's agenda for the rest of May. Is he going to pass some treaties into legislation? Will he pass up some FIFA games for a trip to China? Is he going to be passing some cabinet ministers to the back bench? We'll speculate on all these things, as we always do. The Conservative race here, the leadership race, heads for the finish line. And I think Ronald Reagan's slogan, trust but verify, is turning into a core value of the people managing that race. So Mike will be able to update us on that. And a surprising $250 million win in court for Metro Vancouver, suing contractor Acciona in its $4 billion water treatment plant fiasco, or should I say, is not a win but a whimper. We'll see how this plays out in Lower Mainland elections and talk a little bit about that.
Another drop in the sewage pipe.
That's right. $250 million win, and it's only a fraction of the total cost of the project, or even a fraction of the total cost of the overruns on the project. But anyway, the big news this week is all about Canada and Alberta signing a new agreement to drive yet another pipeline to the Pacific Coast. Mark Carney, once famous as a green global banker with global ambitions, is rolling back carbon pricing, easing carbon emissions rules, and promising big things to Alberta Premier Danielle Smith, at least in part ease pressure from Alberta separatists. Will it work? And why is Premier David Eby watching this from the sidelines? To help us work all this out, we have our good friends from the Discourse, one of Alberta's top political podcasts. That's Erika Barootes, a well-known public affairs expert and commentator, and Alberta's senator-elect. We've talked about that before. Welcome back, Erika.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We're waiting for this election.
Yeah.
I'm going to wait forever, I think.
Oh, dear. And joining Erika this week is Shannon Phillips, former environment minister in Rachel Notley's NDP government, now an adjunct professor, I think that's right, at the University of Lethbridge, and a partner in Meredith Bossencool and Phillips Policy Advisors. So welcome to Hotel Pacifico, Shannon.
Thank you.
So there was a huge focus this week on the signing of a new agreement between Premier Mark Carney and Danielle Smith to build another pipeline to the Pacific Coast for 1 million barrels a day of new capacity. And forgive me for sounding a bit tired. This is a huge issue, of course, and this pipeline, to put it in perspective, would be larger by a significant measure than the TMX pipeline, which is 870,000 barrels of capacity. This would add another 1.1 million barrels a day, a huge increase on top of the TMX pipeline. So what's going on? Do we need a new pipeline every 5 years, or can we get by with one on longer time frames?
Well, according to a number of forecasts, we are essentially, with a lot of the changes that have been made to the Enbridge main line, to a number of the changes that have been made going in and out of the Midwest and at Cushing in Oklahoma, as well as the new egress that we have with TMX, that we are at a place where essentially we now have optionality for the egress of our resources. What does that mean? It means that you can command a higher price for your bitumen, essentially. That you have a bit of competition happening and a bit of choice of where your market is. Whether you need more of that is a question for private sector forecasters, given where we know that production is at right now, and it has also kind of plateaued due to a number of different factors coming out of the oil sands. So that's a question for the private sector to answer, Geoff. And you know, I think it's a question for the public sector to answer on how what is a desired route, whether there is public money de-risking the project, which I think we would all be fools to believe that there isn't going to be public money. There is absolutely going to be federal money going into this thing. I think that's pretty clear from what Mark Carney has sort of said and telegraphed, and similarly Mr. Hodgson. But at the end of the day, the business case for it has to go to the Canadian Energy Regulator, who have always, since the 1950s, assessed a pipeline generally on whether there's a business case for it. And that's what they will do once again. Do you have the barrels to fill it, or will it be a white elephant in the ground? Dovetailing with that process will be the process of capital coming forward or not. And if the only capital that comes forward is public, then I guess we have our answer.
What do you
All right.
think,
Well, I
Erika?
might have a little bit more direct, and I think we could all use more oil and gas in Canada. But do we need a new pipeline? I think that there is clear sentiment that we do. I mean, this is a Liberal government that's actually building relationships with a conservative premier, a very conservative one that's really, called on Ottawa. And so I don't think Mark Carney is going to play all of his political capital if it wasn't desired or required. And so, yes, there is a challenge of what production we would put out. This is a significant symbol, but it's also a significant demonstration that oil and gas isn't going anywhere. As much as maybe some folks in your lovely province think it should go away forever. And so I think what we're going to see is, though, what happened with the announcement. And if I was living in BC, being like, what the hell does this mean to me? What it means is it's a step towards the conversation being bigger. Shannon's right. There is no proponent right now. So we'll have to see from the private sector who's going to step up. And I understand that there is individuals now that they've actually made this announcement last week. But, to people sitting in BC, does that mean that you're going to have a pipeline anytime in the next year? Absolutely not. This deal was for shovels in ground at earliest September 2027. And that's if a bunch of these other dominoes come into place.
Well, that's not very far away. Like September.
It's way closer. Yeah, it's
2027.
fast tracked. He's fast tracking this. And you know what? It's beautiful because there's an election in Alberta next fall. So I'm really hoping that this all comes together for me.
I don't know if it's a fast track. I think it's a Canadian version of a bullet train
Yeah,
to
I'll
get
take
to
it.
September 2027. I mean, considering that's shovels in the ground, that's factoring in
We don't have a
Indigenous
route yet.
consultation. Well, yeah, that's
There's a lot of
bringing
things we don't
forward a
have
route,
yet.
Indigenous consultation. I assume that means NEB approval, as Shannon was outlining.
Yeah.
So, I'll start with you, Erika. Do you think that's realistic?
Listen, I'm usually a pessimist when it comes to the Liberal government. I think that they're like in federal Liberals, I think that they're going to do a lot to make this happen. I do think that this is coming back to what Shannon said as well, is that there needs to be a proponent. And right now it's on the Alberta taxpayer to hold that risk. We might see the federal government also taking on some of that risk, but I don't think that this is as feasible unless we have that private sector, at least in some capacity, coming to the table. Because I think one of the big things that's happened in the energy sector is lack of investor confidence. I will mention there is some policies that would be really nice if the federal Liberals removed them, such as a tanker ban and other ones that are not catering to what the private sector could operate in. But I still think it's a flip of a coin if the sucker actually comes to fruition.
That's the second part of it that I really get confused about, which is the carbon capture and storage. And I think the Prime Minister is still saying that has to happen. The private sector is still saying they don't see a pathway to do that with any profit. So how does that fit in? Is that one of those things that's going to be quietly dropped away at some point? Because it seems to be untried technology, unknown business case, but still there as a non-negotiable demand by the Prime Minister. It doesn't work for me. Am I missing something?
You are not, Geoff. I think that it's very clear when you weaken the industrial carbon pricing, you then lose the incentive on the other side, the business case for investing in carbon capture and storage. And you've heard this coming out of the large producers, that essentially they're not doing pathways without significant public investment beyond the investment tax credits and other measures that are already in place. There's some measures in the royalty regime in Alberta as well that they can avail themselves of. So look, this is leaving aside the questions around technological feasibility and so on. In the first instance, I think we have to look at capital feasibility and whether there is even appetite for it. Right now, there is not. And there is no commitment from the sector. There is only the federal government saying, with absolutely no way to back it up, yes, this must happen. And in fact, the one way that they did have to incentivize it happening, the industrial carbon price, both the stringency and its tightening rate over time, they have loosened that. So I would say that the likelihood of it happening is very, very low. But it may actually also be within this realm of the theoretical, because the pipeline itself, what Mr. Carney is saying is that the permits themselves will be done under the Canadian Energy Regulator. They will not be done under the Environmental Assessment Act, pointing probably, therefore, to the existing right-of-way in TMX. That's the one way you're probably going to get around just an ocean of litigation around this thing, but that the permits will be in place. So the certainty will come from government side. And what he's trying to do is, I think, de-risk large capital projects and signal to investors, not just about pipelines and CCUS, but for other capital investments, that we will de-risk and I'm providing this as context without sort of opining on it. We will de-risk the government side of things on the regulatory, and then essentially daring capital to make those investments, whether it's in oil and gas or mining or maybe petrochemical or other investments. Because ultimately, the Carney government's goal is that increase in new private sector investment by some $500 billion. What they lose on the back end of doing these specific deals, in particular in British Columbia, in particular potentially in parts of Ontario and Quebec, that remains to be seen.
How is well, an oil pipeline from Alberta seems to have pretty strong public support in Alberta. So how's the Alberta NDP playing this?
Oh, supportively. I think, and they don't have a choice in that, not from public opinion and not from their own base. There's a view, I think, of New Democrats across the country that does not apply for Alberta New Democrats, which is that, you have the base somewhere off in, La La Land, and then the accessible voter pool somewhere in the middle. Alberta New Democrats are unfailingly somewhere in the middle. They want to win. They want to take positions that are winning positions and that resonate with the electorate, at least in my experience. So I don't think you're going to see them coloring much outside of the lines on pipeline. You might on things like the deal that was done on electricity and renewables in this deal, which was not particularly good for the build out of new renewables or energy storage or those kinds of initiatives. For sure, you're going to see, I'm sure, the New Democrats criticizing that. But on egress for the product, probably not.
Well, just a follow-up, if I may, Geoff. How are Alberta New Democrats, this is maybe, I'm going back 10 years here in the history of this relationship, but how are Alberta New Democrats perceiving the EB government here, and, how they've been talking about the oil pipeline? I guess you've been to this movie before to some degree.
I have. I was in it.
So was Geoff.
Oh, yeah.
But is it,
this is
not
a sequel.
surprising?
There are differences.
Yeah, there are differences. But what we've seen over the last little while, and I think the next play of this is going to be really interesting. We've seen public opinion change, that it's open to large projects, right? Like across Canada, especially after Trump started doing his Trumpy things in early 25, you saw public opinion swing quite wildly in favor of large projects, in favor of oil and gas development, sort of primary extraction of various kinds, support for forestry, all these things. And I kind of think it was sort of like feeling like, okay, Canadians looking around and going, we're under attack here. Where are our strengths? And Canadians understand that our strengths are in natural resource extraction, right? So I think it was less a raw pipeline kind of a thing, rather than a response to external aggression, really. And that we saw that in British Columbia as well. Where it will come down to more, I think, useful conversations is around project specifics. And the trade-offs in specific projects, because we also know, particularly about British Columbians, that they do not really particularly want to trade off species at risk legislation or Indigenous consultation processes or Indigenous equity participation, these other kinds of things that have now become de rigueur in capital development in Canada.
Guests, today we bring you some big news out of presenting sponsor TELUS. In case you missed it, on May 11th, CEO Darren Entwistle, Canada's Minister of AI Innovation Evan Solomon, and BC's own Minister of Jobs and Economic Growth Ravi Kahlon announced plans to advance 3 sovereign AI factory projects in BC. These will include scaling up TELUS's existing Kamloops data center into a full sovereign AI factory, plus 2 new AI factories in Vancouver, repurposing an existing facility in Mount Pleasant, and a new development at 150 West Georgia. This partnership between TELUS and the Government of Canada is part of a broader federal push to build made-in-Canada AI infrastructure and reduce reliance on foreign-owned systems. And as the province's hometown team, TELUS is leading the charge here in BC. And the Government of Canada wasn't the only partner. These state-of-the-art facilities were run almost entirely on renewable energy from BC Hydro, supported by the Government of BC with a closed-loop cooling system to minimize environmental impact. And the waste heat they generate will feed into district networks to offset power demand, enough to heat the equivalent of 150,000 homes in Vancouver. Once complete, this powerful cluster of facilities is expected to deliver approximately $9 billion in economic value to BC, create more than 1,000 construction jobs, and hundreds of high-skilled roles, cementing BC as a Canadian hub for sovereign AI innovation and a destination for technology investment, talent, and research. It's a big moment for BC. And a reminder of what can happen when governments and industry work together. TELUS is building the infrastructure that will define Canada's digital future, and they're doing it right here on our doorstep.
Well, we'll swing back to BC New Democrats in a sec. But Erika, I was intrigued to see Danielle Smith open the door for the first time, a crack at least to a southern route. Was that an important concession on her part, or something that she's able to say very easily because she's actually really focused on the northern route?
You know what? I think in the political world, a pipeline is considered a pipeline, and so that there is some political advantage to having a route. And like we said, there hasn't been a route. There's still many steps to go for this thing to truly be substantial in a project itself. And so I think it was the right move for her to look at any option, because while standing up for Alberta, she needs to try and get the product to Tidewater, and I don't think she's going to lose sleep at the end of the day what part of the tide she's entering. So I think that, there's always been this talk of the Northwest, but I do think there is many concessions that we've seen happen in the deal as the deal progresses, but also in concessions still to come, and I think that was one for her.
It certainly made it easier for Carney to start the conversation without directly conflicting with David Eby, who's made a big issue out of the tanker ban, which is legislation passed by the Justin Trudeau Liberal government. So I thought that could have quite an important positive dynamic in terms of getting the project under consideration here in BC, because as we said, the first version of this movie was all about TMX, and TMX is there, and all of its problems are largely solved. It's a route that everybody's understood for half a century now. So it's quite a different conversation than proposing to do a brand new pipeline route across northern BC, which was such a struggle with the Enbridge proposal a number of years ago.
Yeah. And the interesting thing, can we just point out that David Eby has not been in those conversations? Like, what is the response in British Columbia? Yeah, you do, because he's kind of like, and next week meeting with the other guy that's impacted is kind of, I think, how Carney, it's coming across at least, of how Carney is looking at this. Typically, ideally, you have both premiers standing there, but I read David Eby's statement, so I'm just wondering from the BC perspective how you guys see that.
Well, their messaging has, and Energy Minister Adrian Dix has been, there's not a proposal, there's not a proposal, there's not a proposal. Oops, there's a proposal. I guess we'll hear from them when that happens, but I think they've written themselves out of the room, and that's a whole other story.
I have two theories about that. One is that I think the comments by Adrian Dix that were more material actually were about the southern route and the ability to dredge Burrard Inlet. You already have all the spill control there. All of the legal and other issues are more or less resolved. And you can then add, I can't remember what the number was, but significant amount of capacity right away, quite quickly. maybe even by the beginning of 2027 or later in 2027, which is not the case for a new pipeline route. I don't care what the Prime Minister says. I think it's in the Prime Minister's next term that he would be breaking ground on that, even if things were done at warp speed, especially if it's a northern route. But here's my theory, which I'd like to ask our Alberta guests. I think that the Carney government's made a decision in its own mind to do its best to get a deal in Alberta, knowing that it's very likely to get a deal for Phase 2 of LNG Canada, which would be the largest private sector investment in Canadian history again, to double expansion on a northern route, which would be very beneficial to Alberta producers who are in those northern gas fields. But we never hear Alberta talk about gas. So does any of that make sense to you? And why do Albertans not care about gas?
Well, I think we've started to hear it. We have started to hear that. The Premier herself has talked a lot about LNG, and I think that's because, although it still has fossil fuels, it is the cleanest of the energy or the oil and gas sector. And so I do think when you're looking at what's being talked about, I mean, they're also still talking about renewables. I do think that liquid natural gas is going to be one of the main products that is going to come hopefully to the East Coast and the West Coast out of Alberta as well, because it is a whole different realm. And I know Shannon worked very closely on some of these files, and especially environment, but it is kind of deemed a little bit, it's branded a little bit better, I think, than traditional oil sands products.
Well, LNG Phase 2, is drafting off LNG Phase 1, which is now stretching back, 15 years. So these are very, very large projects that employ thousands upon thousands of people in construction. Literally, my across-the-street neighbor drives from Lethbridge, Alberta to Kitimat, British Columbia, has been doing for about the last decade because he has a good job up there doing some kind of construction trade. And will do that until he retires. These are jobs that, that I think we basically know are going to happen and have some regulatory certainty to them. They have, tax system certainty to them with accelerated capital cost allowance, all of those kinds of things, and have done for some time. So Mr. Carney doesn't need to necessarily de-risk those projects, but he also doesn't need to de-risk anything politically with BC. He takes them for granted that they are going to behave themselves and not hold a gun to anyone's head or blow up any tables of the First Ministers or the usual ways that Canadian federalism works. And so as a result, he is punished for essentially his good behavior because he is not threatening to do unconstitutional things or otherwise take the country out of the Federation. So, I mean, and looking at where Mr. Eby is at right now politically and some of the challenges that he's had in the last couple of months, I mean, guy needs an enemy. Right. And when he had one in Trump last year, his numbers came up now he might need another one. And Mr. Carney has essentially left himself open to be that enemy. There is probably not the supports in forestry that there should be in British Columbia. And Alberta has just rewritten the entire terms of industrial carbon pricing for every industry in the country that is a large emitter. And Mr. Carney's just taken his marching orders from the legislature in Edmonton. So Mr. Eby is well within his rights and probably well politically advised to make a little noise about that and get some more stuff for BC. There are, as it happens, also 20 Liberal Party of Canada members of Parliament in BC, many of whom won their seats off the NDP.
There are? I hadn't noticed. Pretty quiet out here.
Yeah, exactly.
Pretty quiet. Well, Erika, help me with my train of thought here. Mm-hmm. Justin Trudeau was Prime Minister. Didn't go down so well in Alberta. Bring in a new Prime Minister who's an Oilers fan, who does an MOU last summer, who's followed up with another agreement last week, who says there's going to be a pipeline in the ground. Yet the separatism numbers keep going up and up. They
don't go up per
they're not
se.
going down.
I think they do a wave, right? There's a stronghold of people about that 20 to 24%.
It's getting more attention, I would argue.
It is. And this is the thing, as I was going to say, I don't know if the numbers are shifting as much as it's just the sentiment is being projected and making a louder noise. So I'd say There's a lot of folks that are kind of the diehard. It doesn't matter. I was at the UCP AGM when Danielle Smith got booed for signing that first MOU by kind of that separatist group, which is mind-boggling. I've never seen anything like it. Now, I will say it was like 1 second of the entire convention, and then it changed over tone. So like, she handled it well, moved on. But there was still this sentiment that like, you did this huge thing and we're not going to give you credit for it. I think that was the same sentiment that you saw last week from those people that are never going to change their mind. Where I think that the pipeline actually benefits are for, let's say like people like me or people like-minded to me, where you might want to vote yes on separation to send a message. And I think that the thing that we're seeing is Danielle Smith actually doing the heavy lifting. Many would say that that MOU last week was very much a win for Alberta. And I don't want to get into the details of like the carbon pricing and increase and what industry is saying and stuff like that, because I think on paper, Danielle Smith had a big win in kind of pushing back the carbon pricing in the industry, as well as this, like as you said, a bullet train of when the shovels could be in the ground and some of the other files she's won on. I think that there's a big group of individuals in Alberta, maybe where this starts to simmer, is on the fact that this pipeline isn't just an MOU. It's not conceptual, although it doesn't have a proponent, it doesn't have the consultations and all these other things that could still get in the way. But people are like, kind of almost holding on to hope that this could actually be done. And let me tell you, 5 years ago, this would have never happened. Like, a Carney government is quite different with their relationship to Alberta than a Justin Trudeau government was to
But what
Alberta.
Are the, what
Well,
are the
5 years
stakes
ago,
now?
it was happening because one was being
what,
built.
the separation?
No.
Well, yeah,
A
but
pipeline
I'm not going to give
was
you
being
credit
built
for that.
by the federal
I'm just
government.
kidding. Right, but that was a bailout by the government on horrible policies that Mark Carney himself has put in C5 to ignore those pieces of legislation that Justin Trudeau brought in. Yeah, he can use C5, and he's doing the major projects, and he'll have to make that political decision on C48, which is the tanker ban we've talked about. And I know that that's what probably David Eby is going to try and paint Mark Carney as the villain in this story on, is that tanker ban piece. But he'll have to make that decision. And those are things that Mark Carney can choose to supersede.
Or they go
in
south.
his authority.
Or they go to the south.
Or go south. Yeah, right. And this is the thing, is I think they're both trying to pick lanes. But I will say, though, there's some other hiccups that have happened in Alberta around a judge court decision on the separatist movement, and saying that the petition is kind of null and void, that the government of Alberta is now going to appeal. That in itself will actually not temper the conversation of separation, but I think ramped it up quite a bit by basically having a judge decide that First Nation consultation supersedes the process of the legislation or the democratic process, which would be the referendum. So it's really in the weeds for what does that mean for someone. But what I would say is, if I'm in BC listening to this, the roller coaster of separation sentiment is alive and well. It goes one step, like all the way up, and then you get another announcement with the federal government. It goes down, and then you get these hiccups along the way. And I think that we're still hovering around 30. That would be my guess.
Big breakthroughs tend to get the spotlight, but whether it's sending a rocket to the moon or transforming marine shipping, real progress comes from people showing up every day and building the capacity to do something again and again, not just once. That's the story playing out here in British Columbia. The future of marine shipping will be defined by the skilled teams who make sure the work gets done safely and reliably, day in and day out. LNG bunkering, fueling ships with liquefied natural gas instead of heavy oil or diesel, is an operation FortisBC staff have now carried out over 10,000 times for their marine customers. Think about that. Every single one of those 10,000 operations supports local jobs, generates government revenues, and helps replace higher-emitting fuels with BC's abundant natural gas resource. Every single time. LNG supplied by FortisBC and delivered by dedicated local crews is now a growing part of BC's marine economy. BC Ferries and Seaspan Ferries are moving people and goods between the mainland and Vancouver Island on vessels powered by LNG. And last year, FortisBC notched other milestones, like providing LNG to Seaspan Energy to fuel a cruise ship bound for Alaska and trans-Pacific vessels stopping in the Port of Vancouver. This progress aligns with BC's Look West strategy to strengthen ports, expand trade, and cut emissions. And with Tilbury LNG producing some of the lowest carbon intensity LNG in the world, it is the knowledge and experience of FortisBC staff that turns that potential into real-world results. 10,000 times and counting, FortisBC, energy for a better BC and a better podcast. To both of you then, like, what are the national unity stakes here if the pipeline actually does go through, or what happens if it doesn't go through? Like, what impact is that going to have on this issue? Like, both.
I just talked a lot, so I'll let Shannon go.
I don't think it's going to matter one way or the other, Mike.
Okay.
Because we're still having a referendum question. It doesn't matter if there's a pipeline going through your living room tomorrow. This will not satisfy separatists. And it will
That's
not.
what I think is a key point.
I mean, and it won't satisfy the separatists, not just that are out there in the sort of 20% that Erika identifies, but the separatists in her caucus will not be satisfied by this. So there will be a question. We will be having a referendum, regardless of whether they need to get around the shortcomings of the citizen initiative legislation that was struck down. That there was plenty of warning that it would be, and they put a government question, as the Quebec separatists have now done twice in Canadian history. This will happen again by a separatist party in Alberta, because that is what they have committed to in order to keep their voting coalition together. So we're having a referendum. That's what British Columbians need to know. We're going to have this up and down stuff. But the scenario in which we don't have a referendum, I don't think that exists, because the UCP AGM is in November. And the separatists have already said we're going to organize towards that AGM if we don't get our referendum.
So I will say, I will agree with Shannon that I think a referendum question is coming regardless, or a do you want to stay in Canada question in the fall that they already have in Alberta, 9 questions that I think are stupid. So I'll say it on the record that the other questions that are coming forward in November are a different topic for a different day. But there will be, I think, put on a question of separation or stay. There is in Alberta a petition that was met to stay in Canada, and then there's this other decision of would you want to separate. I don't know which one is going to come forward in the fall, but I would bet my life that one of them is. And I think it's because, and maybe Shannon disagrees with me, but we need to have that discussion in our province and we need to put it to a vote. So I don't think that a vote is going to necessarily make quiet the 20%. I think no matter what happens, a pipeline being built isn't going to subside their sentiment. There is a large contingent that wants to have it. And I truly believe that the best thing for our province is to put it to a vote. One, I don't think it is going to pass either way, but I still think that if it was a vote to separate, I don't think the threshold is there, the true appetite, but I think the ability for people that are very, very frustrated with the last decade of our relationship with Ottawa have that democratic right. And it's been committed to in grander scale by both the pro-Canada and pro-separation groups, that I think it's in everyone's best interest to just have the vote go forward one way or the other.
But so David Eby has said now, loudly more so than he did before, that it's wrong if, in fact, the pipeline is being done to placate separatist opinion. And you both are agreeing that it's a bipartisan consensus there should be a pipeline, so it's not going to have an impact on separatist opinion. What is the role of a premier in British Columbia next door to Alberta, if any, in a referendum on separation in Alberta? It's going to have a huge impact on BC. We could have a lot to say about the success or failure of a separate Alberta. What should he do? What would your advice be to him?
Well, to Mr. Eby,
I tell him to shut up, but
personally, I think that all corners of polite society, if you will, should be speaking out and making a full-throated case for Canada. And I think we all have that responsibility. And I think the more that there are there, the less, David Eby's specific New Democratness stands out, because if the business community is also saying that this is a fool's errand, if elements of the BC Conservatives are saying this is not in Canada's best interest, and if the same thing is happening on the other side in Saskatchewan and elsewhere, then we have a much more full-throated answer to the question than just one person speaking out. But I think Mr. Eby can actually use this to his advantage in a couple of ways. Number one, he should be able to use it as leverage against Mr. Carney because clearly it works. We've all raised children, and rewarding bad behavior is not the recommended option, but that's just what's happened. So he Mr. Carney can expect more meltdowns in the chips and chocolate aisle, I think, going forward. Number two, there's no so he can use that, but number two, there might be a way to use it as a bit of a cudgel against the BC Conservatives, who are given to some of these sort of far-right flights of fancy. They have so far left aside, separation mostly, but they'll go down the rabbit hole on ostriches or on any number of other sort of side quests, if you will, that could work to Mr. Eby's advantage as well, because for most people, the idea of breaking apart the Federation and having a landlocked country or leaving BC aside or separating themselves is insane. People think it's kooky, and that's why I ran in 4 elections. I'm pretty sure I had a separatist up against me pretty well every single time, and they got 2 or 3% of the vote. So to Erika's point about the democratic exercise, there was a chance in 2023 to talk about that. We did not. Nobody talked about it. And in fact, they had to, throw a sheet over talking about CPP at all because nobody wanted to talk about that. It was very unpopular. So if they want to put this to a vote, we should talk about it during a general election. And I've seen what happens when people talk about separation during a general election. People dismiss it.
Has there been much debate, though, in Alberta about, okay, let's just say they won. Let's just say that we voted to separate, or Alberta votes to separate. It has to be a fast track to be Americans. Does it not? Has that not occurred to people? Without a coastline?
I was actually just at this thing at the U of A that's talking about the Alberta Crossroads and the statistics that they're running through the U of A, or the research that they're doing, has very few people, even with in the heavy true believers of separation, that want to be a 51st state. I know that is something that David Eby has drawn as a narrative and tried to paint it that way, as is others. But if we're talking BC, is most individuals that want they want to leave Canada want to be their own independent state. So I wouldn't say that that's the intention. To answer the question, though, of what does that look like, it hasn't been properly mapped out, but I do know there's a lot of economists in Alberta currently working on that to level out the remove emotions, look at what the economics of leaving or staying would and wouldn't be. Because I think that's something that everyone needs to educate themselves on, but it hasn't been done. A lot of this is a very emotionally driven right now. Can I just jump back? Because I do have something that I think, and I'm going to be nice, because my former co-host of the Discourse has left to go work for Premier Eby. And so maybe she can listen to this advice. But I do think watching Eby, he talks from 2 sides of his mouth about this, about the separation or the Team Canada approach. If I was truly advising him, now I know he'd never hire me, but nor would I accept. But I think one thing that he doesn't do that's not landing really well is he doesn't talk about Team Canada. And so, or he will, and then he backpedals on woe is me, wah, wah, wah. And he's got to actually drive that Team Canada approach. And I think he'd benefit from having some colleagues, other premiers, that are actually validating him, because he's kind of literally he's isolated on his little side of the West Coast right now, but he's not doing a good job.
Erika, he's having trouble
driving the team. Yeah, well, this is the other thing.
Convincing his own caucus to vote with him. So,
and this is the thing I was gonna say. He talks about Team Canada, and he can't get his shit in order with DRIPA or his caucus. He has to do a 90-day flip flop. I do think that either someone needs to advise him, focus on your game at home and don't worry about this, or try and actually be consistent in what you're saying about a true Team Canada benefit for all Canada approach. So that's my 2 cents.
Well, take the 2 cents, and maybe the two of you should brainstorm from an Albertan perspective. What would be an ideal dream team to sell Canada? What would that look like? Would it have a co-chair with Stephen Harper, or who's in it?
Jason Kenney's been out there pretty hot. I don't know, Shannon,
Can he sell it?
Your world.
The problem with Jason Kenney is that nobody in Alberta likes him.
So
that's the issue there. On the left or the right? I mean, but I do think he's good for sending the message into the Laurentian elites. I really do. Because Ottawa pays attention. The Toronto Star pays attention when Jason Kenney speaks. And so he's valuable there. I mean, is he valuable as a persuasion sort of tactic in Alberta? Maybe on the margins. Stephen Harper, if he would get off the bench, would absolutely be valuable for, these sort of separatist curious folks that I call them, right? That think that they can send a message or use it as a threat, kind of like people voted in Brexit and then they just got an economic calamity as a result. In my ideal world, it's as cross-partisan as possible because it's not just about conservatives going in to gently massage separatist curious voters and rub their backs and tell them it's going to be okay. It's not just about that. It's also about mobilization. And so it needs to be broader than just conservatives. Otherwise, you're not going to be reaching sort of, the vast majority of progressive voters at all. So it needs to be broad. It needs to be pan-Canadian. It needs to have economic arguments to it for sure. But more than anything, it needs to just answer a simple question. My kids were camping with some, I don't know, rednecks, if you will, on the weekend, and some separatist types, and their question around the campfire, 8 beers in, was just give me one reason to stay. What's one reason to stay? If we cannot answer that question without
Connor
getting into...
McDavid may seek a trade or something.
Yeah, well, I mean, he might anyway, and it might be better for the team, Mike. We could talk about that.
Oh, wow.
But...
Hot take.
It's a hot take. But I do think that we need to be able to answer those questions from a values perspective, from an emotion perspective, and across the political spectrum, because otherwise you're not going to get the vote that you want. Even if you get a 60-40 vote, oh boy, that's scary stuff, right? So it needs to be decisive. These people need to be put back in the corner of where they always were in the 80s. Me growing up, you'd hear these kinds of silly arguments, after the National Energy Program and so on. And people would just sort of give them a hearing and go on with their day and go vote for Lockheed. That's how it worked. And so, we need to get back to that where this is kind of set decisively into a corner. The problem, of course, is that it will continue the care and feeding because of the composition of caucus, to a certain extent, some elements of cabinet, but certainly caucus, and the composition of the voting base and how Danielle Smith has assembled her voting coalition. It will continue. No pipeline is going to make it go away. I'm sorry.
So what about Pierre Poilievre? He's now got a seat in what I assume is the heart of separatist territory, or his seat probably has a stronger than most other places. He's got Drumheller, right? Which
he's that Battle River Crowfoot. Yeah.
So where does he fit in all this? Does he fit in all this? I mean, here's a national leader who's representing Alberta's seat with surrounded by constituents who are grumpy about Canada. Can he make a positive difference to this debate?
Well, I think he's coming out. You got to remember, he is a MP. He's not the candidate, the nomination candidate or contestant next go, right? Damien Couric is back as the candidate of record. And so Pierre is not, I wouldn't say fully entrenched.
Just visiting.
In Battle River Crowfoot. And he got it to have his seat. That was the whole point. He's admitted that he won't be there, from inside baseball, right? But that doesn't change his fact that he's I'm pro-pipeline, absolutely. Yeah. I would remove C-48, C-69, and I would eliminate the carbon tax because of a lot of the argument that the CEO of Cenovus has been putting forward that we're the only ones in a global market that are costing ourselves more money. And so I think he's playing the right game because he still has to be prime minister. And so he doesn't want to see this happen. He knows, too, that and I think a lot of the country does, that Quebec is closely watching this, right? So whatever happens in Alberta, Quebec is watching because they might be going through the exact same thing in a year after. And so I think Pierre's playing, he has to do a dance of the line because he has to still be the heart of the conservative movement as Alberta in our country. But he also has to recognize that his job isn't to be premier and stand up for Alberta, even as the local MP. His job is to fight for Canada to be unified. And so I think he's playing the right line. But if we were talking about ideal scenarios, what Shannon said in the last couple comments, where these people just need to be put in a corner and we need to get this out of the way, that's the exact conversation that we shouldn't be having. We shouldn't dismiss people that feel, and that 20% is a significant number of people that feel unheard, unappreciated, that our province and our country isn't working for us. And so I think that the most ideal is, I will say she's correct in having like a nonpartisan, true facts and emotions, and listening to people about their grievances, even though you might not change them. But that's the type of conversation that we need to have between now and probably the referendum in the fall, about what this really looks like from an economic standpoint, but not to dismiss people and make people feel like they're horrible because they feel crappy about how Canada's treating them.
Well, I could go on, and we could go on this for a long time. Both Mike and I recalled when we were thinking about this conversation, how at the 11th hour and the 59th minute, suddenly Canada became concerned about Quebec separation, and plane loads of Canadians flew to Montreal with dubious positive effects, frankly. So the time to start is now, for sure, for those who care about the future of the country. You're both pressed for time. You've been really gracious to give us so much of it.
Are you guys flying out here? Are you guys going to fly out here to talk about it?
Well, I don't know.
Hotel
we'll
Pacifico live show. Come on,
I'd like
guys.
to negotiate.
Trans-Canada Highway is being widened. We'll have a big
We
convoy.
want to negotiate Lake Louise and Banff as part of British Columbia as part of the separation agreement. So
Yeah, it's
We call
it's
them rallies,
surreal.
not convoys out here, just so you know.
Well, we call them convoys, all right. That's the problem.
No, lots more to discuss. Well, thank you so much for coming and joining us today. We just touched on so many of these important topics, and I'm sure we'll be back again. So thanks for joining Hotel Pacifico. We look to see you again soon. When wild salmon return, coastal communities and economies thrive. By transitioning away from Pacific Ocean-based salmon farms, we can rebuild salmon runs and restore the health of our waters, reviving ecosystems that coastal communities rely on, bringing back tourism, expanding local business, and generating thousands of good year-round jobs across coastal regions. And we can create new opportunities with future-focused industries like modernized land-based aquaculture that protects wild salmon, strengthens food security, and supports workers and families. That's according to our new sponsor, Wild First. For them, it's essential nation-building work, built in partnership with First Nations, that will unlock long-term economic opportunity and attract global investment to Canada's coastal industries. Let's secure a strong, sustainable coastal economy for generations with the wild salmon economy. Wild First. Let opportunity flow. Visit wildfirst.ca. Lots to think about in Alberta, BC, Canada relations.
yeah, Geoff, can I just bring up a separatist idea here
Yeah.
with you? Well, you know how back in the good old days, in the 1850s, there used to be a colony of Vancouver Island. There's a colony of British Columbia. So
That's right.
what if Vancouver Island separated and then the NDP can have the island and the non-NDP can have the rest of the province? Is that reasonable? That's the way the votes would break out. So
Well, I don't know. Do you want any access to a Esquimalt, a naval base, and that kind of thing? I remember in the Quebec referendum, the last one, there was a discussion because they'd already done transition plans in Quebec for what would happen to the CF-18s at Bakersfield. Remember the big base there? And as I recall it, Parizeau had made arrangements for those planes to be, kept as part of the nucleus of a new Quebec Air Force. So I guess Cold Lake, Alberta, has got a squadron as well. A lot of issues to flow from that, but it wasn't clear to me, and I wish we'd had a bit more time with our guests to determine whether or not this question, we don't know, I guess the answer is should we have a discussion about separation or should we separate? I think it's should we have a discussion about separation, but we don't know for sure.
well, I think BC is going to need to have a discussion about Alberta separation because we are directly affected by it, and we can't be passive about it. We have our own interests. If we're cut off from the rest of Canada, I guess south of 60, that's going to be a real problem. But I mean, I don't think anyone believes it's actually going to happen anytime soon, that vote will pass, but sometimes these things sneak up on you.
Well, some of the dynamics emerging already, although they're rumored dynamics and not confirmed, include Gregor Robertson expressing discontent to his colleagues about the deal done with Daniel Smith. Would be unsurprising given his history, but he was closely quizzed about his views on pipelines when he sought the nomination in his Vancouver riding by Stephen Quinn on the CBC, who pushed him very hard on pipelines. And Gregor said he understood that pipelines are part of the equation. He made a pretty stout defense. So we'll see. Stefan.
I doubt he was expecting this.
No. Especially the reduction in the postponing of the carbon tax. If we go back in time, and we should briefly, Gregor was a member of Carol James' caucus when the NDP was fighting the carbon tax on an axe the tax basis, and Gregor worked out a position for himself that allowed him to remain.
Well, then he split off and resigned his seat.
He did leave his seat, but he didn't break with the party on the carbon tax.
Well, he did publicly support the carbon tax when he was mayor during the 2009 election campaign.
100%. Yeah,
so,
100%.
But I mean, with regard to Gregor and Stephen Guilbeault, the former environment minister who left cabinet over these issues, feels like there will have to be a reckoning within the Liberals that for those who were just hoping this oil pipeline issue would go away and didn't think it was going to be seriously happen. I can only imagine if Joyce Murray was still in caucus, or Jonathan Wilkinson's been packaged off to Europe now.
Mm-hmm.
But others who share those concerns, will we hear from them? And Gregor has a choice to make. He's either in cabinet, back in the plan, or he's not. And I don't think there's a way to be wishy-washy about it. I think you got to go with the team on this, or you stand on principle and you decide not to. So I'll be quite interested to hear that, because he is the senior minister from British Columbia, and we hear nothing from him on this.
That's right. Yeah, something to keep an eye on for sure. But closer to home.
Yes.
2 weeks, but only 7 working days left in the spring session, which has been a trail of tears for Premier David Eby. What do you think he will be working on in the next few days before the end of the month and the end of this session?
Well, they're running out of time on this treaty stuff, and there's still discussions going on in the background. Blockades have been threatened in Prince Rupert. And it's a bit of a surprise for people that have been in the couch and in DRIPA space, in their occupying space in their brains about how all that works, to have this treaty issue come along and hear about blockades that nobody had on their bingo card a few months ago. And that's strictly or mainly a dispute between neighboring First Nations about the impact of the treaties. And so what they were hoping was going to be a bit of a victory lap in the legislature this spring has turned into be a bit of a, I don't know if it's a nightmare, but it's definitely a setback in terms of having to sort through the politics of the Kitsillas Treaty and the Comox Treaty. So can they pull it off? I would say it would only be advisable to pass this treaty legislation if they have opposition support. The last thing they should do is ram the treaty legislation through on closure. You don't want to pass a treaty with closure if you can avoid it.
Well, there's some other options too. I looked at the order paper. There's 4 bills left. 2 are, with all due respect to Christine Boyle, who's sponsored them, are very modest measures about maternity leave for sitting councillors on municipal councils, that kind of thing. The 2 treaties are the 2 ones, Comox and Kitsillas. Comox hasn't attracted so much criticism, but it has attracted criticism on the overlap issue from very significant coastal First Nations member nations in the Broughton Archipelago and north. Kitsillas one could go to the fall and be done in a fall session.
Yeah.
They could spend time on Comox. We still need to hear the Premier's estimates, which may be more entertaining.
Well, Comox is no less controversial than the Kitsillas one too. So I think they're kind of a package deal.
Yeah, it's hard to judge. Yeah.
I mean, they might have to slow walk estimates through to drag out the time. The ministers will talk very slowly. The deputy ministers will brief them very
long consultations with officials to make sure we get it right. Yeah.
Lots of long pauses. It's not going to make for great viewing at home, folks, if you're watching every minute of Hansard TV. But I'm sure they will persevere. It's been a pretty light session.
So looking past the session,
Yeah.
I've got a clipping here from Von Palmer, a regular source of clippings of the week here. And he's quoting Premier David Eby a couple of days ago, saying when, and I'm saying when, I'm very hopeful here, this is the Premier, when LNG Canada reaches final investment decision before the end of the year, it will be the largest private sector investment in Canadian history. That was what the Premier said on Thursday. And he cited LNG Canada's recent commitment of the financial resources necessary to get the final investment decision across the line. To us, the decision to release these hundreds of millions of dollars into moving forward final investment decision is a major vote of confidence in the project, said Eby, and that's worth celebrating. And chiming agreement was Federal Energy Minister Tim Hodgson, who joined Eby for that announcement. Hodgson noted the pre-final investment decision was made by Shell and its 4 partners at LNG Canada. So what's your assessment, Mike? Are we looking at a near certain second phase of LNG Canada, and how much would that impact Premier Eby's political prospects this year?
Well, it would certainly be welcome news. Be a massive investment that includes not just the plant in Kitimat, but includes 5 compressor stations between Kitimat and Fort St. John. And these are not small facilities either. Thousands of construction jobs, lots of new investment, lots of First Nation economic benefits, all that stuff. A good news economic story. I would say it's a bigger deal if it didn't go through.
Mm-hmm.
I think the fact that this is phase 2, not phase 1, I wouldn't say that it was a layup to make this happen if and when it happens, but it would have been more damaging if it didn't happen. Now, the other pipeline deal, the Solisam's LNG project to the north, which terminates in the Nisga'a territory, that's a bigger accomplishment in my view, that if that goes ahead, that's a greenfield project. That's a 700-kilometer pipeline, almost longer than Coastal GasLink, and advanced by the Nisga'a with private sector partners. So that's another big one. That's lots of B's, as in billions of dollars of investment. So both the federal and provincial governments, seem to have their eye on the ball on this LNG stuff. The tone has changed a lot in the last couple of years, especially from the province and from the federal government too. The Trudeau government was not, they presided over phase 1 going forward, as did the Horgan government, of course, but I didn't sense that the federal Liberals were ever in love with it that much. But Carney's, taking a different tack here. He's leaning in hard because, get these major projects going because the economy needs it.
Yeah, I step back and think the Premier is now coming up to the midpoint of the mandate that he very narrowly got in 2024. So that the second anniversary of that election will be this fall. It's had a tough session, and it seems like a good time for a reset for a whole set of reasons. A grim time over DRIPA, possibly some very positive economic news coming, probably some further investments in mines, extra work coming on transmission lines and things like that. Do you see a pathway for the Eby team to reset during the summer and find some new legs in the fall?
Well, they should try. How do you reset? Well, you dig down into your backbench and see if you've got something there to throw into cabinet, but you don't really want to, when you have a 1-seat majority, you don't really want to ruffle feathers by removing people from cabinet who don't want to be removed.
Right.
So if there's some
which is everybody in cabinet.
If there's some easy changes due to pending retirements, next election, that kind of stuff, if it can be managed, that's one thing. But if it's like creating more Gary Begg situations, who's clearly someone who wasn't happy about being removed from cabinet, that's not great. Now, you can certainly within cabinet shuffle people around a bit. But, I think probably the focus I would put on if I were them is, what do I have in front of me for a fall legislative agenda? It's only 5 weeks. So it looks like they got a couple of treaty bills probably hitting there. But you probably want to put some fuel in the jets of your supporters in terms of saying, this is why we are NDPers. This is why we support these guys, because they're doing things like this. And I don't know what they have in the tank on that. I don't know what they have intellectually to move forward right now. It does seem like it's a bit of a tired government. They're beset with the issues. I mean, clearly the number one thing is they have to land DRIPA. They have to do that. And I think if they do resolve that, that will help a lot. But if we're going into early October and we don't know what's going to happen yet with DRIPA, that's not going to be great for them.
Yeah, I don't personally see a short-term solution on the DRIPA front because of the enormous pressure that the First Nations exerted on the government to make no amendments and became very, very polarized. So it would take a lot of creativity and trust building to find a pathway there that would allow amendments. I don't see that, frankly, but maybe that can happen.
But we do, with the Conservatives' leadership race over in, just over 10 days from now, maybe they're going to get lucky. Maybe they're going to find an adversary that works for them and helps unify the NDP base. It could go the other way. The Conservatives' new leader might hit the ground running and put the NDP deeper into a bit of a spin. So that's a big wild card coming up, folks.
Well, we got more time to think about the NDP's fortunes, but let's turn quickly to the Conservatives because the race is evolving very quickly. As I said in the lead-off, Mike, it's kind of a Reagan-esque situation where the Conservatives' approach to this as memberships is certainly trust, but verify, and the verification process is long and arduous. And according to your excellent race to replace analysis dropped yesterday, it's having a bigger impact on some of the cultural communities than it is on other parts of the membership, particularly South Asian voters are struggling to get verified. Is that right?
So far, it appears that the South Asian members, which constitute about 20 to maybe 23% of the party, depending on who you talk to, are not getting verified or made eligible to vote at the same pace as the non-South Asian. So that's a factor in terms of how much influence they'll have in the final outcome. But we can expect somewhere from probably 17 to 22,000 people in British Columbia choosing who could be the next premier, and that is because they showed up to participate and pay the $25 and go through this step of verification. So where they put in their ID and it has to get verified. I mean, it's much more arduous than it used to be. I think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
And the five contenders have all campaigned very aggressively and spending money, and it's definitely a vigorous race. And I don't think anyone can really say with any certainty who's going to win.
Well, for a long time, we've heard that Carolyn Elliott is in the lead or certainly in the top three. Isn't it fair to say that she's a big winner even if she loses because she's established herself as a leading personality on the political on the radar here? She's a player, which she wasn't 10 weeks ago, I would say. Certainly not to this degree.
Well, she was certainly a player in BC United, and she was going to run in 2024, and she stepped back after she negotiated the surrender terms at the Palace of Versailles, which happened to be a coffee shop in North Vancouver.
Pretty one-sided negotiation from what we know.
But she's reemerged, and I think the key to her candidacy is that while she stepped down from running in 2024, she stayed visible in the media as a commentator and has been seen as someone who has very clear principles on certain issues, particularly Indigenous issues. And those views have resonated with enough people in the Conservatives that gave her a foundation to launch a campaign. She's very well networked. She's well networked with the political consulting staff class that exists in the Conservative movement. And that got her there. And she has a number of attributes that set her apart from her main contenders who are older. She's younger. She's got a young family. There's a view that she can connect with suburban voters. So to your question, what happens if she loses? She still wins. Well, I think, frankly, if she loses, she loses. This was hers to win, and it may still be hers to win. If I'm Ian Black or Peter Millibar or Caroline Finley or Yuri Fulmer and I win the leadership, I would want Caroline to run for me if I were them, right?
100%, yeah.
So I think there's a good chance she ends up on the ballot next time, unless Pierre Poilievre swoops down and scoops her up to run federally.
Ian Black appears to be the other front runner, pushing back against a surge from Carolyn Findlay, who is, of course, a conservative.
Many people
MP.
have her as number 2, so it's
Right.
hard to tell.
Very hard to tell. Very exciting to see. So when do we think we'll hear the results?
Well, I'm not exactly sure what time on Saturday night, May 30th, or if it's even night or the afternoon. Honestly, I'm not exactly
Yeah,
sure.
week and a half to go.
They
2
will
weeks
be,
almost.
yeah, they will be broadcast live on Global. It may include one of your favorite podcast partners there that night. We'll see.
Fantastic.
We'll see if favorable terms can be negotiated. But it should be an exciting package, folks.
Yeah.
But I think people, even though the race is over on May 29th at 8 a.m. in the morning, that's when voting ends. And they take a day to, I guess, double, triple,
math.
quadruple check in cone of secrecy, because you can't have scrutineers. It's that part of the process else it's going to leak, folks. So maybe if there's a scrutineer, it must be someone who's, mortgaging their life away or something to be part of that. I don't know how it works, but there is that 1 day gap between the voting finishing and then the results coming out. And then when the results are released, it'll be dribbled out on intervals so that we hear the first ballot and then we all react and go, oh my gosh, I didn't see that coming. And then I don't know how long it'll be, 10 or 15 or 20 minutes later, here comes the second count and oh my God, look at what happened. So it will mainly be theater, because nothing real will be happening. It will just be watching the results.
Well, people say that's true of politics all the time.
Yeah.
But
well, no one's crossing the floor in between counts. So
before we close off this part, what do you hear about? We've had Aisha Este, who's the president of the party, as a guest on Hotel Pacifico. Very interesting conversation with her. She and a group of friends were the ones who got together with John Rustad at various locations to have a beer and work out what became this juggernaut of the BC Conservative Party. Are their positions secure? Are they going to continue in leadership? You have Herman Bangus and MLA now, Aaron Gunn now an MP, but a closely knit group of people who arguably were the architects of this.
It's a different party now. It's a different party than it was 3 months ago, going from 7,000 members to 40,000 plus members. So there's bound to be new blood come in, and over time, I think this party will become more kind of mainstream. It'll have more community elites, like business people and other community leaders, get more involved at the riding level. But I think those who got it here, Aisha, Aaron Gunn, Angela Isidoro, Harman Bangu, and others, they will continue to have a pretty significant impact. It may not be when they were starting out and they controlled a lot of it. I don't think it's going to be that, but it will happen the same way it happened with the BC Liberals. The BC Liberals start out with a small number of people getting it going and getting it off the ground, but eventually you have to open the doors and let other people come in order to grow, and then it spreads out a bit. So, I think their legacy, if they are ultimately successful forming government, will be pretty much cemented at that point.
Yeah, very interesting to see. Hopefully we can get some of them onto the podcast. You gotta get busy on that, Mike.
Oh yeah, we'll see about that.
Yeah. One last thing that happened last week, eye-watering numbers again, with regard to the North Vancouver wastewater treatment plant. Was going to cost $700 million, is now scheduled to cost $4 billion partway through the process. Metro Vancouver, which was trying to build a project, fired Acciona, the main contractor. Now Acciona has paid $250 million to Metro to settle that legal dispute, but there's still billions of dollars to spend and years to go before this thing is complete. It's now in the hands of a new contractor. Do you think this will have provincial political repercussions, Mike, as we go forward? There's huge demands from North Vancouver, for obvious reasons, to have an inquiry, because they're going to see their property taxes rise by hundreds of dollars a year for 30 years to pay this debt off under the current schedule.
It's a huge issue on the North Shore where under the current formula, they're really getting whacked on it in terms of, and
8% of the population paying 37% of the cost, something like that.
Yeah, and how much control did they have over this spiraling cost? Not much, right?
Nothing.
So there's a governance issue there in Metro Van that somehow they're going to have to deal with. Because obviously people in Surrey are like, well, we don't want to pay more. Like people in Maple Ridge are like, well, it's not our wastewater project. So there's going to be a lot of buck passing there. I think the question for me is to connect it to the provincial side of things is that there's a lot of capital projects that are going over.
Deep trouble, yeah.
And, I think there has to be a serious review of how capital projects are being done. It just seems like, well, of course it was, estimated $2 billion. Is anyone surprised it's now $4 billion? There's a bit of that just kind of resignation that these capital projects are just going to go over, like it's just normal. Why should it be normal? Like I want government to run capital projects better than I can run a home renovation budget. Like it doesn't. We have all the tools available to ourselves to control these costs. Like we should have no shortage of auditors and financial people and, laws that can back it up and all that stuff. And government's kind of lost the plot, I think. And I would like to see whatever you want to call it, a blue ribbon review, a royal commission, something that has teeth to say, hold on a second here. Hundreds of millions and, well, actually billions of dollars, are being lost here because we just aren't doing it right. And we got to figure out how to do it right. And that may be reviewing all the puts and takes that go into these contracts that aren't, I'm not blaming the proponent, I'm not blaming the builders. I think government's trying to do too much on these projects. And like, do we really need all the bells and whistles for hospitals? Like it comes down to like heating systems and windows and insulation and all that stuff. You want to have a good building, absolutely, but are we trying to do too much? Are we trying to put too many social objectives into the construction process that's adding a lot of money? Are we, there's all sorts of issues, cement, steel, all that kind of stuff. But I'm frustrated as a taxpayer when I see these cost overruns, because I just think we should be able to estimate it better and have a more realistic handle on it than deliver the better.
So I completely agree. And I think we're seeing that when it comes to putting together a project, which sounds on the face of it to be straightforward, like wastewater treatment is not a space launch or creating a brand new AI model. It's something that's been done for a long time. Why that would run away so badly is one thing. Then you have an even more complex project, I think, like building a tertiary care hospital with all of the forward thinking you need to do to prepare for future technological changes. So, and that will cost you more for sure, but it should not cost 2, 3, 4, 5 times what you thought it would.
Well, there's obviously a problem when things start to go wrong that the alarm bells aren't going off loudly enough and soon enough where things can be corralled and, mitigate your losses. And clearly that didn't happen on the North Shore. I think everyone agrees on that. And there's lots of other examples too of where the costs got out of control and it was just let happen, because I think you slowly get cooked in the pot, right? And you just...
Well, Acciona paid its fine, and it's continuing to build the SkyTrain to Langley, so we can still keep an eye on how they perform over there under the supervision of TransLink in this case, I guess. So,
well, I hope they've got lots of bean counters tracking.
Okay, well, I guess we better get off to the minibar, Mike. You got a glass to raise?
I just want to note, raise glass,
yeah,
that it was about 25 years ago this week. Not necessarily a happy anniversary for you, Geoff.
No, I'm not raising my glass, actually.
But was the election of the BC Liberals, 2001. And that was the first Liberal government elected since 1949. And, it's significant for a number of reasons. Some, a lot of them good, some people didn't like. but it ushered in 16 years of BC Liberal government. Gordon Campbell came into that his administration came into office after a pretty hard run in opposition, and they were ready to govern. They were tired of opposition.
Full 5 years. Yeah.
But it was also, when I look at today's politics and look back to back then, they had a really young team. They had a lot of politicians that we became household names, but who were in their 30s and their 40s. A lot of energy in that administration. Now, eventually, with things, it fades, right?
Kevin Falcon, Mike DeYoung, we could go on and on.
Yeah, but it's. I want to honor that 25 years. There's a lot of people that were involved in it. People who ran, the people who worked behind the scenes. And I think they look back on it with a sense of accomplishment, as they should.
Historic turning point. I'm going to raise a glass to MLA Rob Cotterill, Green Party MLA, who decided, absurdly really when you think about it, that he would organize a forum on the Cowichan decision on Saturday afternoon on a long weekend in North Saanich in a Presbyterian church. He got a great turnout. I went because I was nearby. He had two former attorneys general on the panel to discuss Cowichan. One was Andrew Petter, New Democrat. The other was Jeff Plant, who was in that BC Liberal team you just acknowledged. And both agreed that there was no risk to private property posed by the Cowichan decision. Not an opinion we hear very often. Put 100 people in the crowd. It was co-sponsored by an organization that meets regularly in North Saanich to pull together people who are working on tech startups that are often spun off from the Pat Bay Institute of Ocean Sciences. So an interesting sub-audience there. Very interested. I have to say there was no interruptions, no shouting, no heckling. It was a very disciplined, collegial discussion, and some very interesting people in the crowd, including Grant Chief Ed John, who was one of the architects of the DREPA legislation, and Wendy Grant John, who was 3 times chief of the Musqueam First Nation, as well as some other people who know a lot about Indigenous rights and titles. So congratulations to Rob Cotterill. It's going to be taped. It was taped. It's going to be put on YouTube, and there's a lot of very interesting and careful, thoughtful commentary from 2 former attorneys general, plus others. Adam Olson, who was twice leader of the Green Party there too. So against all odds, great outcome on a Saturday afternoon during the playoffs, and congratulations to Rob Cotterill for that.
All right. Want me to take it home?
Everybody relax. Yeah.
Well, thanks to Shannon Phillips and Erika Barootes for visiting Hotel Pacifico this week, and to our sponsors for allowing us to bring this episode to you for free. We'll see you next week. Actually, you'll see me in the meantime with Dylan Kruger on Race to Replace. But Jeff and I will see you next week. BC, you can never leave.